Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Mixed Messages with Jeff Bogue. I'm Joe Caruso, your host. I'm excited to dive into our topic for the day. In a world where everyone, from news outlets to comedians, friends to advertisements, seems to have a strong opinion on how we should think, live, and make decisions, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the noise. When everyone's offering different advice, how do we cut through the confusion? How do we sift through the information overload and determine what truly governs our lives? As we navigate these challenging questions, we want to be a resource that helps you process and pray through some of the day's most pressing issues. Let's jump in. Jeff.
Joe.
How are you, buddy?
Good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And thus wraps up our podcast. If you'd like to submit questions. I was just talking with someone that recently started listening to our podcast.
Oh, boy.
Like for the first time, and they started at the beginning.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they have a job.
I hope it's gotten better.
Well, they have a job where they basically get to have earbuds in all day. And so they started at the beginning, and they're dozens of episodes in now, but they were just telling me how much they enjoyed it. And also the irony of when we started this, we were having an election.
Were we?
It was the end of 2020 when we started this.
Oh, wow.
And so a lot of the questions were coming in about Trump and Biden and the rest, and it wasn't that long ago where it felt like deja vu.
Yeah,
obviously
it was
the whole
back
Biden
to
part,
Trump
but,
and
yeah, now Harris,
whoever
but, But so yeah. Anyway, they thought that was almost funny considering it was 4-year-old conversations. But here we are, and today we had our listener submit a question asking, how does a Christian reconcile the idea of a loving God with the wrath that's often communicated in the Old Testament? Jeff, how do we is that two different things? Like, is God speaking out of both sides of his mouth? Like, how do we reconcile that concept?
Yeah, well, definitely not two different things. God is whole, right? So he is love. And everything that God does, he does with a perfection. So I think you guys are going to have to excuse I got a little bit of a cough. It's been a gift to me most of the summer. But you have to start with understanding that our concepts of justice, wrath, vengeance are not God's. So when God is just, he's perfectly just. When God is wrathful, that's not a personal vendetta. That is an act of justice.
It's not a fit of rage.
It's not a fit of rage. It's an act of justice being played out. When God is vengeful, because God says vengeance is mine. So he's not revengeful. Like, I'm going to get you because you got me. It's all under the umbrella of justice. So when you wake up in the morning, if you want to have a biblical concept of God and a proper concept of God, when you wake up in the morning, you have to basically say to yourself, if I wake up and I'm not in hell, separated from God for all of eternity, everything else is God's grace and mercy. And that probably is the hardest starting point for humanity, because we have been taught, most of us our whole lives, that human beings are basically good. And that human beings, it's finding the expressions of the fullness of our humanity is the ultimate degree of enlightenment, the ultimate degree of good. That is not a biblical worldview. The Bible would teach that humanity is basically sinful, and that we are born into our sin. Therefore, our heart is wicked and deceitful, so much so that we can't even know it. God is perfect. Humanity is flawed deeply, so we are imperfect. And perfection and imperfection cannot coexist. So all that mankind has ever earned for themselves is separation from God eternally, in what we usually call hell. So we have to start with that concept. It's very difficult because our senses of fairness and justice are built off of the idea that we are basically good. And Jesus pushed against this even when he was here. So the Pharisees would pull out the law and they would say, this person got caught in adultery. And Jesus would say, well, if you've thought lustfully of of a woman in your heart, then you've committed adultery. So if you've never done that, go ahead and throw the first stone. This person's guilty of murder. Well, if you hate your brother, if you're a racist, if you're a bigot, if you hate your brother, then you've murdered him in your heart. So go ahead. And what he was saying was that no one is worthy, not even one of us. And our attitude of gratitude does not come from God's abundance in our life. God gave me a new car, He gave me the house I wanted, those kind of things. Our attitude of gratitude needs to start with God's mercy. I deserve to be separated from God. The wages of sin is death. A wage is something that I earn. So the earnings of my life is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So it's hard for us, I think, because when we think of justice, we think, well, I was more right than you were right, and justice is the balancing of the scales, right? So if I did $20 worth of sin and you did $40 worth of sin, justice is you give me 10 and we both walk away with 30. That's also fairness. It's the basis of communism and socialism, and that's what that is. So when we think of God's justice, we tend to think of Him overreacting or underreacting. Wrath, when we think of wrath, we don't think about it as justice. We think about it as anger. And so I'm going to rage. I'm going to lose my temper. Well, that's not the way God would think about it at all. And the same thing with vengeance. We think of it as revenge. And God would think of it as justice or rightness. And that's His job to produce all that. So when you look at the Old Testament, from a human point of view, you would only be able, if you're not allowing God to shape your thoughts, you'd only be able to look and say, that's fair or unfair, or that's an overreaction or an underreaction based on my definition of what I think would be fair or unfair.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, because I do think we put God in a human box all the time, which is hard because that's the only box we're experientially privy to. But God, I think that's also one of the misunderstandings of the word holy. When we say things like God is holy, it literally means He's other. He's different. His ways are higher than our ways. And so we can't fully comprehend what it would even be like to be able to look at all the scenarios, all the people, all the lives, and see them through that lens. We cannot do it. And so, Jeff, there's these other concepts that walk right alongside this. Like, for instance, in Exodus 34, you've actually taught on this passage a bunch just a few years ago. It also talks about how He's slow to anger.
Right.
Like, how does God's patience fit into this equation?
You know, I was remembering this, and I actually looked it back up today, that about 12 years ago and then about 4 years ago, I actually, talking about this subject, I actually taught about the Battle of Jericho. And Jericho is one of those places that we would look and say, God seems like it was an overreaction. That because what the Bible says is that God caused the walls of Jericho to fall down. And then He told the people, I want you to go in and I want you to kill every living thing. That's a major statement. Man, woman, child, cattle, donkey, sheep, goats. That's what the Bible says, like every living thing. And so that would seem unfair, right? Unfair. But what's fascinating is when you look at the Battle of Jericho, it's real interesting how it plays out. And this is in the book of Joshua, chapter 2. What happens is the Israelites come up to the city of Jericho, and Jericho has these massive walls that they can't penetrate. And God tells them to do something really fascinating. He says, I want you to go up to the walls, and I want you to get the Ark of the Covenant. So I want you to get the priests. I want you to get the musicians. And I want you to circle the walls one time every day for 6 days. And then on the seventh day, I want you to circle the wall 7 times. And then what I want you to do is blow the trumpet. And when you blow the trumpet, the walls will fall down. Then you go in and you kill every living thing, right? So it's interesting that we get to the end of how did God allow every living thing, a genocide, to occur, and we don't focus on the 13 trips around the walls. And it's a really, really an interesting thing. Most scholars would say, or maybe I should say many would say, that the circling the walls for 7 days and on the seventh day, seventh time, is actually an act of mercy and grace. That God was demonstrating his presence, and he was saying to the people of Jericho, open the gate, open the gate, open the gate. Let me come in. Let these people come in. Open the gate, open the gate. So 13 times, open the gate, 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 open the gate.
Feels like overkill.
Yeah. And his mercy was abundant and undeniable. His patience was abundant and undeniable. His grace was abundant and undeniable. He could have, with a word, wiped it out. So he appealed and appealed. So 13 times, appeal, 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 appeal. It's crazy when you hear me repeating myself. But 13 times, he's offering a surrender. He's offering even an adoption. Because you see God adopt pagan people all the time. You see him be merciful. Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Like you see Egypt. Like you see him be merciful to his enemies all the time. So what's on display at Jericho is not the unrestrained justice or the anger or the lashing out of God. What's actually on display is his mercy, and it's the rejection of his mercy again and again and again and again, which, by the way, is the same thing God does when he allows us to be separated from him in hell. He has appealed and appealed and appealed. He's given you life. He's given you abundance. He's given you friends. He's given you love. He's given you the message. When you've heard the gospel of Jesus again, 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 and again, and again, and again, and again, and you say no, 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 no 13 times, is that an unjust God sending you to hell? Or is that a hard-hearted person who will not receive the salvation that's been offered to them again and again? So the question comes to me, over the years, it's like a philosophical question. How can a loving God send people to hell? And my answer to that is he doesn't. We send ourselves. We sin. We reject. We won't listen over a lifetime of God's being merciful. And you might say, well, Jeff, how's he merciful? Well, let's remember that all I deserve is to go to hell. So every breath I breathe, every good piece of my life, every relationship that I have, every wonderful bite of food that I taste is all an act of love, mercy, and a example of God caring for us and looking at us. So, it's fascinating. Like the Bible says in Romans that even nature cries out to the glory of God. So the reason, like in Romans 1, the reason people are condemned is because they worship the nature instead of the God that created it. They rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected. So when you look at the Old Testament, behind those stories is the real story. And it's fascinating that when you see God's mercy, then you see that his wrath was not unfair and it was not unexpected or uncalculated. It was the end result of an appeal that was rejected again and again.
So what's interesting, because if the question is posited, and what's the difference basically between this God of love that we tend to lean on in the New Testament and what seems to be sometimes a God of wrath in the Old, one of the things that you're pointing out is, well, we tend to jump to these conclusions. or we jump to the conclusion. We see the whole story playing out, for instance, the Battle of Jericho, and we jump to the seventh day, and we're like, see, look, he destroyed all these things, and we're not doing the backtracking work of watching God's patience, his mercy show up. And we're also seeing God work things out in relational terms pre the sacrifice of Jesus.
Yeah, and you're not seeing two different sides of God.
Right.
Because Jesus would say, "Let he who has ears, let him hear."
Mm-hmm.
I've told you. If you're not going to listen, then you're not going to listen. Jesus would speak strongly against the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You whitewashed tomb, you brood of vipers, and he would condemn them. Well, this is the Old Testament. God gave the Garden of Eden way, way, way before Adam and Eve had themselves expelled from it.
Mm-hmm.
God gave an 80-year-old woman a child. God spared and blessed Egypt when Joseph prepared them for a famine.
Mm-hmm.
God blessed the nation of Israel when they were hungry. First of all, when they were enslaved, he freed them. When they were hungry, he literally gave them manna and quail. Mm-hmm. He literally fed them, just like Jesus fed the 5,000 in the New Testament. Mm-hmm. And you could go on and on and on. When the book of the law was found by King Josiah, God allowed his name to be restored and rebuilt the kingdom. When God spared Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego so that the people of Babylon would worship the one true God, same thing happened with Daniel. Mm-hmm. God shut the lives of the mouths of the lions. Why? So that the people of Babylon would know he's the one true God, and that's when the Babylonian king said, well, now we're going to worship the God of Daniel. God's mercy is everywhere in the New Testament, and in essence, what you see is the same God in the Old Testament, same God in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, he's in essence saying, let he who has ears, let him hear. Mm-hmm. You won't hear. Yep. So now you're condemned. Just like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, many of them were condemned because of their hard heart. The same thing is happening in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. And we'll say, well, there was kids involved in this and that. Well, I agree, and it's hard to understand. I also don't understand why Jesus walked through seas of sick people, healed one, told him not to tell anybody, and then walked back through. Mm-hmm. So we see this same characteristic playing out in Jesus. Maybe we can understand his heart a little bit more easier because it's closer to what we can relate to as far as time and culture. But it's not the wrathful God of the Old Testament and the loving God of the New Testament. Nope. Same God, same path, different sets of circumstances, but really the same outcome. I love you, and I want to bless you. I've come to give you life and give it to you more abundantly. If you keep my commands, I will bless you. That's how it's said in the Old Testament. But if you reject the Son of Man, you will lose you're going to gain the world and lose your soul. Mm-hmm. It's the exact same mindset or idea. It's very consistent throughout the Scripture.
The consistency is huge. There's the movie nerd side of me that's like the Old Testament just playing out as the prequel, but you're going to see the same themes, the same types of energy and characteristics and stuff playing out throughout any good storyline. The
It's more of a musical. It's an act one, act two.
Yeah.
And there's literally an intermission where the Bible's silent.
Yeah.
But it's the same story.
Yeah, that's really, really good. What's wonderful, right, because at least in the context of this conversation, it might be easier to trace back some of the mercies into the Old Testament than at least some people might be able to take some of the wrath into the New. But you've mentioned a few of those instances of obviously we can condemn ourselves to hell by rejecting God and his invitation. We also see things like Ananias and Sapphira in Acts, I believe, chapter 5. But the good news, right, the gospel also talks about Jesus absorbing the wrath of God for any that would respond to him.
The wrath of God is poured out on him, right? And I just think I think we lie to ourselves. I know I do. Maybe you guys are better, but I lie to myself and I think, well, if God would just show me or ask me in a different way, I would respond. And you get into, I think think it's Matthew 14, I'm not sure, but there's this imagery of the rich man and Lazarus, and the rich man is in hell. Jesus is telling this story. And the rich man's in hell, and Lazarus was a beggar, died, went to heaven. The rich man was a greedy rich man, died, went to hell. The rich man's in hell, and he looks back at Jesus, and he says, will you dip your finger in water and scorch or touch or cool my tongue? And then he says to Jesus, he says, will you at least go and tell my brothers? And Jesus said to him, I've sent people to tell your brothers. They won't listen. Mm-hmm. I came and I told you. Mm-hmm. I sent the prophets. Then, of course, the New Testament, I sent my son. We have, God, God has said it and said it and said it and said it. It's not that it wasn't said. Mm-hmm. It's that it wasn't listened to. And so for the rich man, we're like, man, God, that feels like overkill, hell. And for God's like, no, this is the end of it. This is the natural path of your own desires. Mm-hmm. You wanted life absent of me, and the Romans 1 says he gives us over. I'm giving you what you want. And in Romans 1, there's all kinds of sins there that God gave them over to their sin. And what he basically says is, okay, you can have what you want. Mm-hmm. And you're responsible for that now. I'm not responsible for that. I remember when I was a teenager, I bought my first car, and it was a Ford Escort GT. Some of us middle-aged people remember this. It was orange and black, had the spoiler on it, because the airflow on a Ford Escort was really important. So it's just a cool little car. I remember I went to buy it, and my dad didn't want me to buy it. And so my dad wanted me to buy a Toyota Corolla. I was like, that's a dumb car. I don't want to buy that car. And he's like, well, okay, do what you want. And he was teaching me a lesson. So I bought the Ford, and it was cool. It was really cool. But it broke all the time, all the time. And I go to my dad, and I'm like, Dad, the car broke. He's like, yep. My dad, I need to get my car fixed. He's like, yeah, you're going to have to get some money together and get that fixed. He wasn't rubbing it in, and he wasn't getting revenge. He was teaching me, yeah, son, you made a bad decision. You ignored wise counsel. It's fine. Now this is your responsibility, not my responsibility. Because I tried to help you avoid it. We don't like that with God. No. We're like, well, you should bail us out. We don't like that in life, whether it's student loan forgiveness or when a cop pulls us over. Mm-hmm. My reason for going way over the speed limit is valid, and you holding me to account is dumb. Why are you being a jerk? And they're not. They're like, no, you're the one speeding, not me.
Yeah, and very rarely are people speeding unaware that they're speeding. They're setting their cruise control at a number they're comfortable with over the speed limit. I mean, it's
even if they're unaware, it's still their responsibility.
Right. Oh, absolutely. It is. Yep.
And yet you'll see times of mercy when you're like, my wife's in labor. The police are probably going to get you to the hospital and not give you a ticket.
Right.
But it's like, one of my kids one time ran into a car. And I'm like, are you okay, this and that? And I'm like, well, you're going to have to pay for it. They're like, I didn't mean to do it. I'm like, it doesn't matter. You were behind the wheel. Mm-hmm. And that's the way this works. You assumed the responsibility of your life. It's actually okay that you didn't, I don't think you went to ram a car. You had an accident, but you're responsible for it. Mm-hmm. So we don't tend to like that. So we project that back into the scripture. Mm-hmm. And when we think something is unfair, we look and say, I'm going to ignore all the warnings that people were trying to tell me not to make the decision that I made. Mm-hmm. I remember one time there was a radio personality in Cleveland, and he's passed away now, but I used to listen to him a lot. I liked his radio show. It was a sports show. And he was a chain smoker. And he got lung cancer. And he went on the radio. He said, I'm going to sue the cigarette companies. I'm like, there's no way you didn't know. Now, I don't want you to have lung cancer. In fact, he didn't. I don't think he died of lung cancer. You know, I didn't want him to be sick, and I didn't wish ill upon him. But I thought, hold the cigarette companies accountable. Like, everybody knows that smoking's bad for you. Well, we don't like that. And we read that back into God's word, and then we're like offended that God didn't warn. Because we have in our mind, God warned Jericho 13 times. If he would have warned them 14 or 15 or 20, and God's like, no, it would not have mattered because they had hardened their heart.
And on God's part, that's not even a guess. He like literally knows it would not have mattered. It's interesting. Something you mentioned there, Jeff. We find ourselves justifying anger and the desire to see wrath poured out on people all the time. And so if someone wrongs us, if someone wrecks into our car, we would expect that they would pay for it or that their insurance would cover it. And if they started to fight against that, we would bubble up with anger and we would want justice.
Yep.
The moment that exact type of scenario is then put on God, we're like, well, how dare he?
Yeah.
And so it's a fascinating realization that we have a little bit, because we're created in his image, we have a little bit of that innate sense of what it would look like to see a quote-unquote righteous anger bubble up because someone was wronged or we were wronged, and we would want to see something happen in its place to fix it. But we don't like the to be called out on that. We don't like to be a part of that, and I think that's one of the reasons we try to keep it from being a part of God's character.
Yeah. Now, I'll say this as we kind of wrap up this discussion. I think it's fine to question God. I think it's fine to not understand, because I don't understand Jericho.
Sure.
I think it's important that we see the goodness of God and the mercy of God. I think that's wildly important. This is always going to come down to faith. So I have to have faith that God is a God of love, which is what he says he is, which means that I need to look at Jericho through the lenses of his love. And it causes me to see it differently. I'm still going to be left with the question of, God, did you have to? Every living thing? I mean, good night, right? And that's where I'm going to be left with faith of trusting his justice. That is a decision that I would have never made.
Sure.
And I am not going to be able to ever fully comprehend it. So what God wants from his people the most is faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. I'm going to rest in faith. I have to. And faith is choosing to believe what I know I cannot and will never understand. It's not blindness or ignorance or childness. It's a decision. And I'm going to trust that God is who he says he is. I'm going to trust his perfection. And through that trust, I'm going to read and see the events of the scripture in life, and even my own life, that I cannot do the full math on.
That's really helpful. I think we have an opportunity to see that trust grow. That's why God invites us into that relationship with him, because as we deepen that relationship, the trust becomes more natural. And so when the situations feel more unnatural, we are more and more inclined to say, well, God, I don't get this, I don't understand it, but I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm walking with you. Well, I certainly hope this has been helpful for all of our listeners, but especially the one that submitted this question, as we continue to look at the consistency of God and his character throughout all of Scripture. If you have questions you'd like us to address, you can always submit those at bath.gracechurches.org/mixed messages. And if we can help you take any unique next steps or grow in any particular area, reach out. Let us know. We'd love to help you and get you the resources or connections that you need. If you like what you're hearing and you want to hear more of it, make sure you subscribe, follow, rate, and review our podcast. And if you're looking for a group of people that are running after this God, you can join us in person here on the weekends, or even begin to check us out online. Thanks so much for jumping in with us today as we continue to see God's voice through all the mixed messages around us. See you next time.